Everyone. So again, second session. Today we have taken up another important topic, and the topic is in relation to the Conference of Parties Meeting 16, and under which convention you all must be knowing this fact, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. So there have been certain key outcomes, but to be very true, not many outcomes are there. Just one or two important outcomes are there. Okay. But that does not mean that this topic is not important, because if there are not many outcomes, the question arises that why aren't there many outcomes? We all know that biodiversity is one of the areas, one of the biggest threats and problems which the world is facing. Scientists have claimed this present age as the Anthropocene age, sixth phase of mass extinction, biological annihilation. All of these terminologies basically reflects what? It reflects that the biodiversity across the world is under threat. Are you getting it? If the biodiversity is under threat, and the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, which is a multilateral convention and the only convention in this very regard, if it is not able to deliver much, then what are the issues? That is why today's topic is not just only related to the outcomes, but a critical analysis of COP16 UNCBD. Okay, so we shall be discussing the important things in this regard from the perspective of civil service examinations. Before coming to COP16 meeting, just a brief background. We all know that there was a Rio Earth Summit. Okay, so today's session will go like this. Just a brief background of the Rio Earth Summit and how the UNCBD came into force, and then we'll jump to two important things. One, COP15 in 2022, which was the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So we will have a passing by reference of it and the important outcomes, because only then we will be able to analyze that whatever things were promised or were envisioned in the last COP, what has happened on those targets in this year. Okay, so there was a Rio Earth Summit in 1992. We all know this particular thing. Out of this Rio Earth Summit, we know that there were three major outcomes. The first was the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The second important thing was United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And the third important thing was United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. These three conventions, which were the result of Rio Earth Summit, together are known as what? They are known as sister conventions. Three sister conventions under Rio. Right? Now, when we have to talk about this today's session, that is the COP16 or COP15, it is basically in relation to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. Okay, so under this, first we'll just quickly have a passing by reference of the COP15. This COP15 was organized in year 2022. Under this particular UNCBD, this particular convention, it is said that the members, the signatories of this particular convention will meet every 2 years. Okay, so every 2 years there will be a meeting. That is why today in 2024 there was one meeting, and the last meeting was 2 years back, that is 2022. In this COP15, the outcome was a very famous one, which is known as Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Right? So it is also written in short form as the KMGBF. So Kunming-Montreal Agreement was the outcome of COP15. Under this agreement, there were two important things which were promised. What were those two important things? One, there was a very important target, and which was Under this agreement, basically there were 23 targets and there were 4 goals. So obviously we are not going into the details of all these 23 targets and 4 goals. But the most important thing, the most important target was 30 cross 30 target. Now this 30 cross 30 target basically aimed at what? It aimed at 30% of conservation across the world on land as well as on seas by the year 2030. Okay, so according to this particular target, all the members, in order to protect the biodiversity, must strive and aim at conserving 30% of the total area of the earth, including land and water, by 2030. That is by 230. Okay, so 30 cross 30 target. The second important thing was, it was said that there will be around $200 billion per year by the year 2030. This much amount was pledged to be used in order to conserve the biodiversity, for the biodiversity conservation across the world. This amount was not only to be provided by the countries, this amount was to be provided by countries, by philanthropists, by corporates, companies, multinationals, etc. Okay, so it is a complete fund which was pledged $2,000 billion per year. Are you getting it? It is a huge amount. Out of this $200 billion per year, $20 billion per year was committed by the developed country, which will be given to the developing nations. Right? Two important things under Kunming-Montreal agreement. One was the 30 cross 30 target, and second was the financial commitment which was given by the developed world to the developing countries. These two things were important. One, there were other approaches also. For example, to in the next meeting, that is, it was said that in the next meeting, that is in 2024, the countries, the respective members will come up with their updated national biodiversity strategy and targets, which India has also come up in this particular year. So obviously there were other agreements and there were other outcomes of COP15, but as far as our today's discussion is concerned, we have taken up just these two most important critical outcomes and the critical highlights. Okay, now cut to this COP15. Now we shall be moving towards the COP16, which has been held this very year, where it has been held in Cali, which is located in Colombia. Right? So COP16. Now when we have to deal with COP16, from the UPSC's perspective, we just need to have the overview if there is any important outcome or not, and what are the fallouts or what are the drawbacks, what are the issues, what are the conflicting stakes between developed and the developing world. Are there any interest involved of the corporates or not? Okay, so this is a thing. So that is why we will divide this particular COP16 into two major sections, the first and the second section. The first section basically will talk about what? It will talk about the highlights or the outcomes. Okay, so it will be talking about the outcomes, and second will be the critical analysis, or let's say issues. So we shall discuss all these things one by one. The first and the most important outcome under this COP16 was the creation of Cali Fund. Cali on the basis of the name of the city, and fund, the Cali Fund. Now what is this Cali Fund? We should understand this particular thing. Okay. Now we all know that there were two important protocols of this Convention to Biological Diversity. One was the Cartagena Protocol, right? And second one was the Nagoya Protocol. The Cartagena Protocol was basically aimed at biosafety measures, and Nagoya Protocol was basically aimed at fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Now, this is an important term, important concept, and important pillar when it comes to biodiversity conservation. Now, what do we understand by fair and equitable sharing of benefits? So, this we need to understand in a manner. So, when we talk about biodiversity, you must have heard about DSI, that is digital sequenced information. Now, this DSI basically is what? It is the amount of information which is derived from the biological resources and have been stored digitally. Okay, I'm repeating it again. It is the amount of information, a piece of information which is derived from the biological resources and it is stored digitally. Okay, so for example, let's say there is some wild vegetation in the forest, and out of that vegetation, the genetic, I am seeing its genetics and I am deriving out some information and I'm storing it digitally. Where this information can be used, this information can be used at multiple in multiple areas. For example, this information can be used to develop medicines, to develop vaccines. This information can be used in order to increase the agricultural productivity. So why? Basically, this is a genetic information. Are you getting it? The second thing is, the second question which you should understand it arises is that who are the true owners of this biodiversity? Who are the true owners of these genetic resources? If we agree that most of these information are found in the forests, so the first responders or the first communities in living in the forest should be the owners, that is the indigenous communities and local people, the forest dwellers, the tribal area, the tribal people. Okay, but because they are not having so much of technical and financial resources, these people are exploited. The resources are derived with the help of their traditional knowledge by large multinational companies. And if those multinational companies are able to, let's say, make some medicines out of these resources, then it is believed that at least the benefit which has arisen out of these things should be shared with the indigenous people. So that is why we say that fair and equitable sharing of benefits, that comes under Nagoya Protocol. So what this Cali Fund is aimed at? Cali Fund is aimed at this DSI. This Cali Fund is aimed at promoting equal and fair sharing of benefits with the indigenous people. How this will work? So there will be certain corporates, right? These corporates are required to donate or to give some funds into this particular fund. Now, how it will be divided? For example, there are certain guidelines which have come up. It says that all those corporates have to give the money into this particular fund. There are three criterias. Okay, so just a bit technical. For example, it says that if first criteria is that if the profit has surpassed $5 million. Second is the sales have surpassed $50 million. And third is the assets are more than $20 million. So the guideline says that out of these three things, if two things are met, even if two things are met out of these three things, that particular corporate, which can be a pharmaceutical industry or anything, that particular corporate has to give some money into this particular fund. Are you getting it? This fund basically will be further used to support developing countries, and these developing countries will further be supporting via this fund the local people, the tribal people, as well as the indigenous people living inside the forest areas, who are treated as the first owner of this crucial information, right? So this is one, that is Kali Fund. The second important outcome of this COP16 is that a permanent subsidiary body permanent subsidiary has been established for whom? For indigenous and local people. Now, this point is very important. So, under UNCBD, there is a very important article, that is Article 8J. This article is not that important, you don't have to memorize this thing. Article 8J basically talks about protecting the interest of indigenous and the local people, right? Till now, what was happening? Till now, these people were not represented by any permanent body. Okay, so that is why there was an informal framework. So there were few people who came as an informal party, and that is why they have to be dependent on other countries to put forward their interests. Okay, so they have to ensure the goodwill with the other countries which were hurting their interests. So that is why, in order to resolve this particular issue, now this informal framework has completely been removed, and hence, for the first time, this is for the first time, a permanent body has been established which is independent of other countries, and they can come directly from this year onwards, and they can come directly and can participate as the independent body to protect the rights of the indigenous and the local people. Are you getting it? Second important thing. The third important thing which has which the just a minute. Yeah. So the third important thing is, as we have discussed over here in the Kunming-Montreal agreement, that the countries were asked to submit their updated national biodiversity strategy action plans. So updated national biodiversity strategy and action plans were submitted by around 44 countries, and India has also submitted its plan as per the target, as per the goal which was set in the previous COP, that is COP15, right? Then there was another important thing, that certain guidelines were laid down in order to identify ecologically and biologically sensitive areas. So their identification was also to be taken care of. But as I have said, that these are minor outcomes. The two major outcomes of this COP16 is Cali Fund as well as the permanent body for indigenous people. From the perspective of civil service examination, there are other initiatives and the other steps which have also been taken, but not very relevant. Okay, so this is a thing. And but now the issue is that there are a lot of criticism, and the critical analytical part therefore comes here, comes into action. What are the issues which are involved in this particular regard? So we shall be discussing these issues also. Okay. Now this needs a discussion, and you people should understand this. First of all, yes, the Cali Fund has been created. We agree that it is a good step, and that is why it will be able to, up to some extent, it will be able to protect the interests of the indigenous people and local tribal communities. Question. First issue is the issue of sovereignty, which has been raised by India. So issue of sovereignty. India says that all these multilateral agreements, okay, these multilateral agreements should be voluntary in nature. Why? Because the domestic countries, the respective countries like India, they have their own domestic laws. Okay, so if they are having their own domestic laws, as well as we also know that these countries have their own developmental aspirations, so it cannot be like this, that there is some body which can impose something on these countries, because under this Kunming-Montreal agreement, India said that the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities as well as respective capabilities, this principle should be followed in biodiversity conservation efforts also. Are you getting it? So according to this particular principle, there cannot be a one size fits all approach. This is one thing. Now this particular thing is countered by the developed world. Okay, so developed world basically says what? Developed world says that, let's say there are two issues. One, if we provide the exceptions to some countries or some corporates on the basis of their developmental levels, if we provide the exceptions, then there will be no money in the Cali fund. There will be no money. Correct? The second important thing is that if we do not provide the exceptions, okay, so these countries, like for example India, let's say, if they are having some domestic laws that the corporates have to submit some amount of money in their domestic fund, and then the corporates have to submit some amount of money in the Cali fund also, so it can be a double penalty. Right? Are you getting it? So there can be an issue of double penalty, or there will be no money at all in this particular fund. So this is basically the criticism which is given by the developed world against this India's stand. Now when the developed world gives this particular criticism, then India says, okay, if you people are so concerned about the global biodiversity, and if you are saying that there were a lot of targets under this particular Montreal framework, then what about the nature funding? What is nature funding? This particular target, you people pledged that you will provide some money to us so that we can develop our own capabilities in order to conserve the biodiversity. Where is that money? If you people are so generous to conserve the biodiversity, and you are saying that there will be no fund in the Cali fund, and there should not be any exceptions, fine, agree. But first, you people should fulfill your responsibilities, your commitment, which you gave under in last to last year, right? So this is the second criticism. The third criticism is, experts say that there is an issue of legitimacy. Okay, there is an issue of legitimacy of this particular fund. Why? Now this was a very interesting thing. A lot of major decisions were put to vote on the last day of this summit, and you will be surprised to know that majority of the countries and their members and their delegations had left Cali in the morning, and a lot of countries, because there were changes in the flight schedule, and there are the official records for this. For example, country like Fiji said that most of the countries have traveled because they didn't have enough money that they can adjust their flight tickets as per the changed schedule of this particular summit. Fiji said that we are the only countries among the most vulnerable group of countries who are here. Rest all other countries have moved because they didn't have money. So basically they wanted to make a point that we are not having the money. That's why we had to leave. And because we are not having the money, developed world should give us the money. But the experts say that when there are a lot of countries have moved, and then a lot of major funds like Cali Fund and other major initiatives were put to vote, was there any quorum which was left? If the quorum was not satisfied, if the basic minimum requirement of the members were not there, then there is an issue of legitimacy of this particular fund. Okay. The fourth issue which the experts have pointed out is, what about this thing, 30 cross 30 target? What about 30 cross 30 target? So nothing much has been said about the 30 cross 30 target. Okay, are you getting it? So nothing much has been said about this particular thing. Next important issue was raised by the African group as well as Brazil, and in the last COP, India also raised a similar issue. It said that you must have heard about the Global Environment Facility. Okay, so Global Environment Facility basically is dealing with a lot of things. This group and Brazil and last summit India said that now this GEF has become overburdened, and therefore we need to have a separate fund not dependent on GEF. So there has to be a separate fund which will take care of the global biodiversity conservation efforts, right? This is the thing. And the last important criticism, was in the context of the leadership. Several experts have said that the leadership which was witnessed in the last COP, that is COP15, by the countries like Japan, UK, China, Canada, European Union, all these countries were the leaders in this COP15 and they worked very hard to bring such important targets. No countries were seen so active in this year's COP meeting. Okay, so there was a clear lack of leadership in this year. So these are the issues which have come up, and that is why a lot of articles have said this in a sense that nothing much has come out of this COP16 meeting on biological diversity. Okay, so this was the critical analysis of this meeting. These were the key important outcomes, and this was the historical context in which we have discussed the present issues dealing with the COP16 Cali. Okay, so that is all from my side. I hope you have enjoyed this particular session. If you people have to take the screenshot, you can just take the screenshot. Okay, but always, it is always important that you hear properly. Okay, so thank you everyone. All the very best and study hard.